Hello and welcome to another episode of a Brothers Creed podcast where we inspire fathers to build the blueprint for the next generation. We are the Thomas Brothers. I'm Ethan.
And I'm Jared. And today we're going to talk about an attribute or virtue of gentleness. I think there's a lot of different ways to take this one, and there's a lot of different facets to gentleness. So we're going to discuss how it might be beneficial to our lives and how it might not be beneficial to our lives. When are there times to just force it through as opposed to being gentle with it, if there are any. So it'll be a good discussion. Let's go ahead and dive in.
All right, let's do it.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day.
You should be a monster, an absolute monster, and then you should learn how to control it.
No retreat, no surrender.
You can't conceive of what I'm capable of.
There is no tomorrow. There is no tomorrow.
What we do in life, that goes in eternity.
All right, so gentleness. What were your initial thoughts on this one, Ethan?
I had to kind of look into this one because I will self-admittedly say that I have not always been gentleness has not always been my go-to as a parent. I feel like I have had some good times, right? And actually, it's kind of interesting that we did this one now because I would say that I have really been trying to put forth effort into being a little bit more gentle in my parenting, in my interaction with not only my kids but my wife as well. And I'll kind of get into some reasons why as we continue to get further on. But I think that gentleness is like a lot of other things to where it's a balancing act, right? You have to, the first thing that comes to mind is gentle parenting is like the new rave, right? Oh, gentle parenting. Basically gentle parenting to me means I don't want to have any accountability or responsibility for what my kid does, and so I'm just going to let them do whatever they want, and hopefully it ends up right. So I don't think that's the way to do it, right? I think it is important to be gentle in parenting, but just to, give kids need direction, they need guidance, they need leadership, they need discipline sometimes. I think adults sometimes need discipline and direction as well.
Does guidance and direction, does that preclude being gentle? Can you give guidance and direction while being gentle?
100%. 100%. I think that
maybe
those things aren't really opposites, but I think sometimes they can be that way. I guess specifically talking about like gentle parenting it reminds me of this video, this TikTok of this like lady who's this child psychologist or whatever, and she's sitting there trying to work, and there's like a lamp on the table, and her daughter comes in and like is just like pulling the lamp on and off, and like the light on and off and on and off and on and off and on and off. And she's like, okay, sweetheart, let's not do that, or I know that's so much fun, but let's not do that. And then she just keeps doing it, keeps doing it, and keeps doing it. And then she's like, hey, mommy's on a meeting, let's not do that. And then finally, she was just like, okay, well, how about you get 5 more clicks? You could turn it on and off and whatever else. And I kind of look at that and I'm just like, if it were me, I'd just be like, dude, don't freaking touch the light. Like, stop.
That doesn't work either.
So I'd probably just unplug the light or like, I don't know, push him out of the way gently.
Well, I think that sometimes people fail on kind of both ends, right? So there's something that's out there that's called gentle parenting, right? Some parents might they say, oh, that's a good idea. Like, so they just hear it or they hear a couple of tips about it, but they don't really know how to do it, right? Just like maybe there's parents, and then I think that sometimes people who tend to be more heavy-handed, they see other people trying to be gentle parents and maybe not doing it right or not doing it how you're supposed to do it, and they're like, "Oh, that's wimpy. That doesn't work, obviously." And so I think that sometimes it's like, well, who are we looking at that knows how to gentle parent? I don't know. I think that sometimes it's just like, if someone showed me like the best way, if I could just say one time, "Hey, son, after you take a shower, could you hang up your bath towel, and then could you put your clothes in the dirty clothes basket?" If I could just say that in a way that would make him do it the first time, I didn't have like, please tell me, But it seems like the way that it is now, I have to say that like literally 20 times, and then I walk up there and there's clothes and towels over the floor. I'm like, "Yo, what the heck happened?" So, I don't know. Maybe I'm gentle. I start gentle, and then it comes to a point where I'm like, "Yo, I've said it like 16 times."
I literally wrote that down. One of the things that I said is, I said, my kids typically listen when I speak to them in like more of a stern or a harsh manner, but a lot of times, I do have my limits. Sometimes I'll, start gentle and just be like, very okay, and I'll say it several times, and then it like won't change and it won't help. I'll be like, "I love you so much. I know you're feeling this way. I'll validate and everything." And then it kind of gets to a certain stage, like, "Okay, I'm done." Like, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that that happens. I think that maybe there's different techniques. Sometimes I'll try to be like, "Son, stand right in front of me," and I'm like, "Look me in my eyes," and then I will say, "You need to go take a shower," and then I'll say, "Tell me what I just told you," and he's like, "I need to go take a shower." And I'm like, "Okay, can you please do that right now?" So it's like this over confirmation that he hears what I'm saying. So I think there's lots of different ways, but that is one aspect of gentleness. That's one. That's kind of one facet of gentleness. It is like parenting and being gentle as a parent. I think that in some ways, as fathers, especially, it's almost like there's a tendency to not want to be gentle, because it's like, well, someone's got to harden these kids for the real world, and it's kind of, I think it's the mother and the father's job to get the kids ready, but women often take on more of a nurturing role, which fathers can absolutely nurture, but I think that fathers sometimes take on a role of really trying to prepare the kids for the realities of life and the hardships in life. Usually if you see a kid really struggling or something like that, and sometimes you'll see the mom swoosh in and try to help or over coddle, and then the dads will sometimes be like, let him fail, or let him fall, and then he can learn from this. So I think that in some ways it's a measured approach between. You think about I think about me and my wife as a unit, and so like her gentleness and my gentleness, and sometimes my just allowing them to learn a hard lesson or to fall because they're doing something stupid. We kind of come together, and that creates an environment where they can experience a spectrum of things to where they can grow. And we're not too gentle with them. We don't have them come walking around in a bubble. It's like, "Hey, son, if you keep riding your bike like with no shoes on, you're gonna scrape your feet up on the concrete." And it's like, if he keeps doing it, it's like, let him scrape his feet up, and then next time he won't do it. So that kind of thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I will say that, like I said, my kids are typically pretty decent listeners, at least, with simple instructions. If it gets, go take a shower and then hang up your towel and then put your clothes away and then brush your teeth and then get ready for bed, it's like you lose me like 2-3 steps in, or I lose them.
Yeah.
But I will say that, especially in times of like anger and frustration, I would say my kids definitely react better to gentleness. A lot of times, fighting fire with fire is not always the answer. And I think sometimes, kids will go into, an emotional, as they're trying to figure out their emotions, right? They'll go into an emotional fit and they'll be, doing whatever. And if I have noticed personally, because I've done it both ways, right? I have
Yeah.
responded with an emotional response and yelling and trying to control the situation. But me personally, I have found that if I can keep my cool and I can continue kind of gentle interaction, or I can kind of support gentle interaction, typically it helps them to calm down more quicker, to be able to control their emotions, because they'll kind of feed off of where I'm going,
Yeah.
or what the level that I'm giving them. Um,
Yeah.
and so, I think, I mean, you can take gentleness in so many different ways. Whether it's teaching or interacting or trying to calm them down, or there's lots of different things that you can do. And I like specifically one of the things that you said, how you like, look me in the eye. And I kind of looked up some of the different like tactics for being. So I looked up some tactics for being gentle, right? And then I also kind of, we can get into it afterwards after we talk about it, but also like, I guess maybe why it's important to be gentle, to a certain kind of emotionally, and the importance of kind of at least some gentleness. But some of the things that I researched into, things that we can do as fathers in interacting, specifically with kids, to be gentle with them, is active listening, right? Give your full attention. If your child is wants to tell you something or struggling with something, right? Whenever you're talking with them, don't be on your phone, scrolling on your phone as you're talking to them. Like, just actively listen to them. Physical affection is always a good one, right?
Hmm.
A hug, or, a little cuddle, or always goes a long way. At least with my kids, some kids aren't as cuddly. Speaking softly and calmly, validating their feelings, even though, maybe their feelings are this, this small, or it's not really a big deal. People just like to be validated. And so validating, to a certain extent, obviously situation by situation, you don't want to just constantly validate them, but um, another one is quality time, playfulness, spending individual time. We've talked about that with our kids. Um, Encouraging positive reinforcement, right? Not saying, I'm proud of you, son, or hey, you did an excellent job on that, or, just positive reinforcement's always good. Apologizing when needed. I've definitely had to do that sometimes. Respecting their boundaries. Teaching through example is always a good one. Um, Being present, and then just kind of encouraging open communication, right? I want my kids to be able to talk to me when they have questions.
Yeah.
It's funny. I had kind of the big curse word talk with one of my sons the other day, and I mean, it was like everything, for every category from top to bottom, everything in between. And we talked about, um, you know, what's appropriate and what's not appropriate and everything else. And then, he came home from school and he was like, Dad, in the bathroom, kids were saying like a lot of the words that we were talking about. And I was like, "Oh, really?" And he was like, "Yeah." He was like, "I really want to like talk to you about it." And he was like, "But I'm not going to say them at the table because there's little kids listening." And I was like, "Oh, okay, all right."
You
And
like
so,
catalog the words, like these are level 10 words and these are level like 1 words. It's like, oh
well, and I had
gosh,
like,
it's like
well, I
level
had like
1.
these, I had like these are just like general, like these ones are, let's just not even go there. These ones are like are words, but they're not really towards any specific person,
Uh-huh.
right? They're just kind of like general, like bad words. And then
Uh-huh.
these words are like words that are actually like meant towards a person, like you
Yeah,
are
yeah.
a this.
Yeah.
Um, And then there was a whole like sexual category of like, hey, these are all of these other types of words, and this is what all of these mean.
Pull out the
And
whiteboard. It's like, all right, son, what kind of sexual words has anybody called you?
yeah, well, just like slang for body
Yeah, yeah.
parts and
Yeah,
different
yeah.
things like that.
Oh, that's funny.
I mean, it was a great conversation, but it felt nice that he could come to me and say, "Hey, this is something that we had talked about, and can I ask you some questions or whatever?" I mean, I want to
That was great.
try to continue that going forward, but if I would have kind of just reacted and you know, don't ever say these words and blah 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 blah, and maybe was more like, if I ever catch you saying any of these words, you're gonna get it and blah blah. Maybe that's not as gentle instead versus like, hey, let's open dialogue, let's talk about things like,
Yeah.
not to say that I'm the idol of parenting, but
Hey, we're trying here.
I felt a little win there.
We're building our creed together. Yeah, the good.
Yeah, seriously.
No, that's good. That's great to hear. I love that. When I was thinking about gentleness, I thought, I kind of thought about it in the sense of, the kids and stuff. I don't feel like that's something that, I feel like I'm pretty gentle with the kids. So I didn't really like focus that didn't really like, wasn't something that caught my attention mainly with this attribute. I think that the most of it was just the kind, the kind-hearted tenderness or mild-mannered aspect to it. I think that nature itself is very violent and it can be very cruel. And if you don't believe me, just go watch the Discovery Channel for 20 minutes. And so, choosing to be gentle with somebody else, or with a child, or with someone who's being belligerent, or with and obviously there are limits. If someone's like threatening you or whatever, then but choosing to be calm, mild-mannered, and gentle with that person, I think is a very that aspect of it can be very noble, and it shows that you're in control of yourself, and you're disciplined enough to control yourself. Someone who's just flying off the handle and like ready to fight at any moment, or just start screaming and yelling. There's a guy that I used to work with, and let's see, I'll try to make this anonymous. He was he's kind of an older guy, and he would just be like, yeah, sometimes, like, I just get into this mode, and my kids have a name for it, and they call it like, it was like his, it was like his last name or something like that. It was like, this, when I get into this mode, they know that I'm all on, and it's like he just becomes like the biggest a-hole
villain, yeah.
So that falls in the category of something to call somebody. So he becomes a bad dude, and it's just like, I don't know. It just is like, okay, well, now I know that like you're not very disciplined because you can just fly off the handle as soon as something upsets you the slightest bit. And so I just
how do you think his kids act?
Yeah, I think it's and actually that kind of theme of like taming the wild nature of yourself, that actually was represented in a lot of the Greek architecture and statues and stuff. If you've ever noticed the statue of David, he has just a tiny little penis, and do you know why that is? That's actually intentional. That's not nowadays it's like, everybody wants to have this big, giant representation of their manhood. But back then, they would sculpt a sculpture of someone, and they would make their penis very small. And they did that because they felt that it showed that this person wasn't so animalistic, or they weren't so, they were more, they had dominion over themselves, and they were disciplined, and they felt that back then it was more animalistic to have this just like, giant piece.
Yeah.
So it's
Interesting.
kind of
I've
interesting.
never heard that, but that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you'll hear people like, "Oh man, like these people back then." It's like, no, there was like actual purpose why schlongs were so small.
Kind of
back
like controlling your
It's
your
your
natural
urges.
man. Or,
It's it's good. It's like you have the ability to control your urges, and it was kind of kind of a symbol, but like
Yeah,
people,
representation.
Yeah, people who didn't. If you have a third leg, then obviously you're gonna have a harder time controlling your urges. If something that big. So it's kind of interesting, but I think it just kind of ties back to the ability to be disciplined and mild mannered, and choose to be mild mannered is, I think, a noble virtue in itself.
Interesting. That went in a direction that I didn't think it'd go in, but I think it definitely relates to gentleness and controlling your emotions for sure. If you just will like go off the rails at the drop of a hat, then yeah, do you have control over yourself? And a lot of times we're trying to, tell our kids, stop crying or this or that or whatever, when it's like we just like
True power is if you could just give your kid a look and then they know.
Yeah. And I've done that before too. It's like, my kid's crying and they're all frustrated and they're crying because maybe they're angry or sad or whatever else. And then I respond with that with anger and just like, stop crying, man up or whatever. I don't typically say that, but I'll say, stop crying. And I have really gotten better at this, because it's like, especially if I get frustrated, because my reaction is basically just a reaction of anger, which is the same thing as them crying. And so, I've tried to do a lot better and saying, instead of just like, stop crying in frustration, I'll be like, hey, let maybe validate a little bit, right? And then I'll talk about like, does this amount of crying equal the amount of, stimulus that made this cry, right? Like, is just because your brother, bumped into you, does that really constitute this screaming and wailing, or are you just like, maybe putting on a little bit of a show?
Yeah. Totally.
Versus like, hey, if you fall out of a tree and split your head open, like, yeah, maybe that could, or, sometimes crying isn't just physical, or if, you really are really sad, right? You didn't, I don't know. First thing comes to my head, I didn't make the football team in 7th grade. And I remember I cried just because I was sad. I was disappointed. Dad picked me up from the from tryouts, and he was like, "Hey, how'd it go?" And I was like, "I didn't make it." I remember I cried.
Yeah.
But I don't remember Dad saying, "Oh, suck it up, be fine." Just like, dang, man, that sucks. Like a little bit of validation kind of goes a long way. Yeah. So from I guess we talked about some of the tactics of gentleness. Some of the reasons why it's important for fathers to be gentle in their communication, or have an aspect of gentleness, right? We're focusing in on gentleness, but I don't think, I think that it has to be combined. I did have a quote that I put together that kind of talks about this as well. But one of them is emotional security. Gentleness helps children feel safe. It can help, that emotional security can build confidence and self-esteem in kids, which I think is a huge thing. Healthy development kind of goes along with that. Balanced discipline. A lot of times, if discipline is done gently, but it can still be like consequential, right? Gentle discipline doesn't have to mean that you just let them get away with everything. Mm-hmm. Gentle discipline is that you can, discipline to the fullness of the consequence, but do it in a manner of maybe a calm manner. Modeling behavior, setting a good example. It can kind of, teach them. A lot of times kids will mirror how their parents or their father or whoever taught them. And I think it just, it builds trust. It promotes confidence in your kids. Yeah. And I think in general, it can strengthen the family bond. What were you going to say?
No, remember when we had, I think Wayne Boatwright was his name, the guy who was in prison, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we had an episode where a guy he served 15 years in prison. He was a drunk driver, killed somebody in a car accident, served some time in prison, and he was talking about people in prison, and he was like, a lot of these people grew up in a state of survival. And he actually talks about kind of 2 or 3 different levels of that. One was a state of survival where you're just constantly like, everybody's out to get me. I think the next level was like eye for an eye. It's just like you're out for yourself. And then like that kind of next level up was like you have the sense of community or whatever. But like your kids aren't going to learn, or you, or anybody around you, your coworkers, they're not going to learn very well in an environment where they don't feel safe, or they're just being yelled at, or it's a violent environment. And so if they're in this fight or flight mode all the time, they're going to be stuck in that, and they're not going to be able to progress and move their minds to like a better mental state. Now, I think that there might be some times when gentleness, I mean, you talk to a Marine boot camp instructor, and I would be interested to hear what they say. I mean, that's just like all of a hammer. You know, these guys are just hammers, and they're just trying to get nails. But I think that I think that I've never been through boot camp, and I can't speak, but from what I understand is that the first kind of week is crazy, go. But then they got to settle down a little bit, and they got to have some classroom instruction, and it's not so crazy, go. Because if you're just crazy, go all the time, you're just kind of like, it just puts you so much out of your element. And I know that they're trying to shake these guys up, trying to get the recruits out of their element. They're trying to kind of get them in a new mode and break off some of their old habits. But when you're really trying to teach someone, you got to chill out a little bit and be more gentle with them. And I think that they would probably echo that. But if there's any drill sergeants out there, let us know. Love to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think too, I think that there is, it kind of differs, right? I think the gentle toughness balance, right? I mean, when we say balance, we think like, 50-50, exactly even. But, I think sometimes gentleness weighs more than toughness, and toughness sometimes weighs more than discipline. And so you need gentleness. And so sometimes you need more than the other. But I think as specifically children progress in age, I think sometimes that kind of goes up and down, right? And I think, sometimes, toddlers that don't speak yet, they don't quite understand like the gentle discussion and explanation of why we don't do this specific thing.
Yeah.
Maybe they more react to a quick, no, maybe a more stern interaction.
Yeah.
As they get older, now you can like discuss, well, why is it that we don't do this? Well, what, and then you can kind of like reason almost with them sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. That's just something that I thought, but
no, totally. I had a couple of things here that was interesting. One of the things is that Aristotle had talked about this concept of proates. I'm going to butcher the Greek. That's the Greek word. Being gentleness, mildness, meekness. He said it's a virtue that stands between 2 extremes. The orgolotes, which is uncontrolled, unjustified anger, and arrogistia, which is not being angry at all, no matter what takes place around you. So he said that like it's kind of somewhere in the middle. Is it like that, where you're not flying off the handle at every second, but you're not just folding over, like you're not. It's not like you're like, I don't care about anything around me. It's kind of in the middle somewhere. So I thought that was kind of an interesting argument that he proposed, and that's kind of something that just kind of think through is what that middle might be, what it might look like. I saw a quote that I liked on this one about being gentle. I think it's important to be gentle to yourself. We've talked about being gentle with kids or others that we interact with. We've talked about being physically gentle with others in the world, with things that we do. We talked about being mild-mannered, but I think it's important to be gentle with ourselves. Sometimes we can be incredibly hard on ourselves, and that is something that's often overlooked or not talked about. And so there's this quote that says, "Growth is an erratic forward movement. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Remember that and be very gentle with yourself." So that was by Julia Cameron, and I thought that was a good thing. Sometimes you just expect to be just exponentially getting better. Something I'm working on is just getting better at some of my jiu-jitsu skills. Sometimes I walk in there and I'm like, oh man, I'm pretty freaking good. I'm pretty good, I can hang. I got a few submissions tonight. Other times I walk out of there and I'm like, man, I have no idea what we were doing. I had a hard time doing that move, and I don't even barely remember what that move was. I can't even remember what we did last week. So it's just like sometimes I feel like I'm doing pretty good. Sometimes I feel like I don't know jack squat. And so I just kind of remember to be gentle with myself, and it's just a progress. And if I'm just learning things, I need to be intentional about. Sometimes I started taking notes on things that I'm learning, but it's important to do that because your self-talk that you have, if you have a negative self-talk, that could be very detrimental to you. What do they say? As a man thinketh, so is he. Mm-hmm. So if you are thinking all the time, oh man, I'm horrible. Oh man, I can't do that, or oh that's beyond me, or I don't have the ability to do that, or whatever, then you're going to be that person that can't do things. But if you're like, you know what, I messed up, but I can do better next time. I'm new at this, or I'm learning something, or I'm trying to do my best job, and kind of give yourself that grace and that gentleness.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, being gentle with yourself. I think it's a great interpretation of that. I kind of came up with my own quote that I said, "Gentleness will balance out the toughness that it takes to be a father. These two, when used at the appropriate time, will develop a child that understands the importance of discipline, but also the comfort that comes with genuine, gentle love." So kind of talking about the balance between gentleness and, I guess, toughness is the word that I came up with, but you can still be gentle and tough at the same time. But I feel like being able, and I thought, well, maybe I'm going to use the word sternness, right? But that just didn't roll off the tongue as well. But I think there's definitely a balance of learning when to be gentle and maybe when to be a little bit more assertive, or however you want to say it, in all aspects of life, right? Sometimes you need to be more gentle with yourself, like you were saying, but then other times you just, need to, yell, keep pushing when you're running up the hill and you're dog tired and, you want to get that last rep, right? And you're aggressive with yourself. I'm not being gentle. I'm going to get this,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. It's a balance. Like Aristotle said, it's a balance between the two extremes. Yeah. So I think you got to find where that sweet spot is,
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's been good, man. Yeah. It's been great. It kind of makes me think about metalworking, right? Grinding on stuff in the garage. I like to, when I have the opportunity to, work on some metal stuff and cut out some knives and grind and shape some knives. But it kind of reminded me of a steel that is like very, very hard. It is very brittle and can break easily. And steel that is too soft will not hold a very good edge. And so it really takes a balance of that hardened steel in combination with uh, tempering to make that a little bit softer so that you can have a useful tool.
Yeah.
Just something that kind of, I don't know, kind of stuck with me in balancing out the hardness, the harshness with gentleness.
Yeah. No, love it. I think this is a great attribute that we could all, I think, use a little bit of ourselves, and we could all spread it around a little bit. It's always, I think that it can be a compliment. I think that if someone were to say that, like, you have the ability to be strong and tough and really, kind of get something, force something in, or have the power to do something, while at the same time having the ability to be very gentle, I think that's quite the attributes to have. So it's a great one to put into the mix.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, all the listeners out there, let's work gentleness into our lives, our personal creeds, and test it out, see how we can utilize that to, become even better and better every day to build the blueprint for the next generation. So, thanks for listening, and let's build that creed together.
Let's do it.